In the final years of World War II, as the conflict in Europe raged toward its conclusion, another struggle was escalating far across the Pacific. Japan, once confident in its expanding empire, now found itself isolated, surrounded, and increasingly vulnerable to a new kind of warfare, one unlike anything the world had ever seen before. This transformation came in the form of a revolutionary aircraft that would redefine the skies and reshape the final stage of the war, the American B-29 Superfortress. The origins of this mighty war machine began long before it ever reached Japanese airspace. In the late 1930s, as tensions grew around the world, American military planners recognized the need for a bomber capable of crossing oceans, flying at high altitudes, and delivering massive payloads with deadly precision. Traditional bombers like the B-17 and B-24 were powerful, but they lacked the range necessary to reach targets deep inside Asia from any safe American-controlled base. To reach Japan, the United States needed something bigger, faster, and more advanced than anything that existed at the time. That need gave birth to a project so ambitious that it became the most expensive aviation program of World War II. Even more costly than the Manhattan Project engineers designed a bomber with pressurized cabins, remote-controlled defensive turrets, unprecedented fuel capacity, and 4 massive Wright R-3350 engines capable of propelling it across entire continents. This was the B-29 Superfortress, a giant of the skies that would soon become the nightmare of Japanese air defenses. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, the United States entered the war with a renewed determination to push back across the Pacific. But the distances were staggering. Even after capturing island after island, most American aircraft still could not reach the Japanese mainland, except the B-29. This plane was the key to striking the heart of Japan's industrial, military, and civilian centers. But before that could happen, America needed bases close enough for the B-29 to operate from. This led to one of the most difficult logistical operations of the entire war. At first, the United States attempted to launch B-29 raids from Chinese bases in what became known as Operation Matterhorn. It was a daring plan, but it came with enormous challenges. Every gallon of fuel, every bomb, every spare part had to be flown over the Himalayan mountains, the dangerous hump. Just to support a single mission, 4 gallons of fuel were burned to deliver 1 gallon to the bombers in China. It was unsustainable, but it gave American commanders their first taste of what the Superfortress could do. Early missions faced engine failures, mechanical breakdowns, navigation difficulties, and fierce Japanese resistance. The B-29 program was still new, and the aircraft was so advanced that mechanics were learning in real time how to keep them flying. But the potential was unmistakable. Even when damaged or under attack, the B-29 showed remarkable resilience. Its speed and altitude made it incredibly difficult for Japanese fighters to intercept. Japanese anti-aircraft guns were not designed to reach such heights. The bomber could hit targets that had once been considered untouchable. But it wasn't until the Americans seized the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam that the true power of the B-29 was unleashed. These islands, once fortified by Japan, became the launching point for the deadliest and most persistent bombardment campaign in military history. From these new air bases, the B-29 could reach Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, and every major industrial center in the Japanese mainland. And from here, a new chapter in warfare began. In late 1944, the first waves of B-29s rose from the Marianas and headed straight toward Japan. Flying at altitudes over 30,000 feet, they passed above the reach of most Japanese defenses. Their engines thundered across the Pacific, carrying bombs that would plunge the home islands into chaos. The Japanese population, accustomed to years of victory, suddenly found themselves vulnerable to an enemy that could not be stopped at sea, on land, or in the air. At first, the American strategy focused on high-altitude precision bombing. The targets were aircraft factories, steel plants, oil facilities, and military installations, but the winds over Japan, especially the fierce jet stream, made accuracy extremely difficult. Bombs drifted miles off target. Many missions failed to hit their intended objectives. Still, the message was clear. The United States now had the capability to strike Japan whenever it wished. As these raids continued, a new commander took charge of the air campaign, General Curtis LeMay. Known for his cold efficiency and ruthless focus on results, LeMay understood that the existing strategy was not achieving the level of destruction necessary to cripple Japan's war production, so he made a dramatic shift in tactics, one that would shock both Japan and the world. LeMay ordered the B-29s to abandon high-altitude precision attacks and instead fly low at night, carrying incendiary bombs designed to burn entire urban areas to the ground. Japanese cities, built largely of wood and paper, were especially vulnerable to fire. A single spark could ignite an entire neighborhood. With hundreds of B-29s dropping thousands of tons of incendiaries, the results would be devastating. The first major test of this new tactic came on the night of March 9, 1945, in an attack that would become infamous. Over 300 B-29s took off carrying a deadly mix of napalm and cluster incendiary bombs. Their target, Tokyo. Flying just a few thousand feet above the city, the bombers unleashed a storm of fire that transformed the capital into a sea of flames. Winds intensified the blaze, creating a firestorm that devoured everything in its path. In a single night, more than 100,000 civilians were killed, making it the deadliest air raid in history. Japan was stunned. Civilians who once believed their cities were safe now faced the full force of American air power. The B-29 had proven that it could not only reach Japan, but break it from within Tokyo. The firebombing campaigns expanded. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, Yokohama, and dozens of other cities became targets. Each raid brought unparalleled destruction. Factories vanished, supply networks collapsed, transportation systems fell apart. Japanese fighter aircraft were overwhelmed, outdated, and increasingly scarce. Fuel shortages crippled any real defensive effort. Anti-aircraft guns fired blindly into the night, hitting only a fraction of the bombers crossing overhead. By mid-1945, the United States began organizing massive, coordinated assaults using up to 1,000 B-29 bombers in a single operation. These raids struck multiple cities simultaneously, spreading Japanese defenses thin and accelerating the collapse of industrial output. From the ground, civilians watched in terror as waves of superfortresses covered the sky from horizon to horizon. Their engines created a deep, rolling thunder that echoed across entire regions. For the Japanese military, this was a nightmare they could not counter. Fighter pilots struggled to climb high enough to intercept the B-29s, and even when they did, the aircraft's defensive firepower was overwhelming. Remote-controlled turrets, manned by trained gunners, unleashed streams of .50 caliber rounds that tore through attacking fighters. Japanese pilots often sacrificed their lives in kamikaze-style interceptions, but even these desperate measures had little impact on the bombers' ability to reach their targets. As the raids grew in size and frequency, Japan's ability to continue the war began to crumble. Entire production networks disappeared. Airfields burned. Ammunition factories fell silent. Transportation hubs were destroyed. Japanese troops on distant battlefields found themselves without reinforcement, or supply cities were leveled so completely that aerial reconnaissance struggled to identify where buildings once stood. For the civilians living beneath the onslaught, the psychological impact was overwhelming. The sound of approaching aircraft triggered panic. People hid in shelters, trenches, basements, anywhere they could find cover from the relentless firestorms. But many shelters proved useless against the intense heat and smoke created by the B-29's incendiary payloads. Families suffocated, burned, or were trapped in collapsing structures as cities turned into glowing infernos. Through all of this, the B-29 emerged as the dominant force in the sky, an icon of American industrial power and technological achievement. Its ability to carry massive bomb loads across thousands of miles made it the centerpiece of the strategic bombing campaign. But as the raids intensified, the United States prepared to deploy an even more powerful weapon aboard the very same aircraft. The Superfortress was about to change not just the course of the war, but the course of human history. And as Japan braced for the final phase of destruction, the world would soon witness the most devastating attacks ever delivered by air. As the summer of 1945 approached, Japan's situation grew increasingly desperate. The relentless firebombing raids, launched night after night by the B-29 Superfortress fleet, had transformed dozens of cities into charred wastelands. Factories were gone, power stations were ruined, and vital transportation routes had been severed. Yet despite the destruction, the Japanese leadership refused to surrender. They believed that if they could endure long enough, perhaps they could negotiate better terms or force the United States to invade, inflicting heavy casualties and buying time. But American planners had no intention of slowing down. The B-29 fleet continued its devastating operations, growing in both size and efficiency. Maintenance teams worked around the clock, turning the airfields of Tinian, Saipan, and Guam into some of the busiest runways in the world. At any given moment, hundreds of superfortresses sat lined up wing to wing, ready for the next mission. Their crews, exhausted but determined, understood that they were at the center of a campaign that could bring the war to an end. The bomber crews lived with constant danger. Long before reaching Japan, they had to survive treacherous weather, unpredictable engine failures, and the unforgiving vastness of the Pacific. A single malfunction could force a ditching into the ocean where rescue was never guaranteed. Many planes disappeared, swallowed by storms or mechanical issues. Others returned home riddled with holes, struggling to land with failing engines or damaged landing gear. Yet despite the risks, morale remained high. Every mission brought them one step closer to final victory. By this time, the Americans had perfected a tactic that broke the last remnants of Japan's urban stability. Instead of targeting a single city per night, General LeMay ordered simultaneous raids on multiple cities, dividing the B-29 force into massive waves. These 1,000-plane operations were unlike anything seen before. An air armada stretching across the skyline, engines roaring like a continuous thunderstorm. Japanese civilians described the sound as a sky filled with dragons, their wings shaking the earth with each passing formation. The results were catastrophic. In city after city, the fires spread too quickly for firefighters to respond. Many cities had lost most of their fire brigades to earlier raids, leaving communities defenseless. Neighborhoods that had survived other attacks finally succumbed to the overwhelming waves of incendiaries. Entire districts disappeared overnight, leaving behind nothing but ash-covered foundations and skeletal ruins. Survivors wandered through the smoldering remains, searching for family members, food, or shelter. Despite the destruction, Japanese propaganda insisted that victory was still possible, that the spirit of the nation would prevail. But even inside the government, the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Reports showed industrial output collapsing by more than half. Weapons factories stood silent. Aircraft production had nearly halted. The once powerful Japanese Navy, shattered earlier in the war, could no longer sail to support the homeland. All that remained was a shrinking, fatigued air force and pockets of ground troops unable to influence the outcome. Meanwhile, the United States was preparing to use the B-29 not only for conventional bombing, but for something far beyond anything the world had imagined. After years of secret development, the atomic bomb was nearing completion. A bomber had already been selected to deliver it. That aircraft would be a specially modified B-29. capable of carrying the extraordinarily heavy nuclear device. The eyes of the world were unknowingly fixed on the Superfortress, which was about to become the delivery system for a weapon unlike any in history. Before the atomic missions took place, the B-29 crews continued their massive incendiary raids. By late June 1945, the campaign had reached such intensity that many Japanese cities were no longer considered targets. They no longer existed as functioning urban centers. The American bombing surveys showed horrifying results. In some cities, over 50% of all buildings had been destroyed. In Tokyo, the devastation covered more than 15 square miles, carved into the capital like a giant scar. Yet Japan still fought on. Its leaders held closed-door meetings, debating whether surrender was even possible. Some believed they should continue resisting until the last man. Others argued that it was better to negotiate before the nation was completely annihilated. But the B-29s continued flying, and with each mission, the arguments for continuing became weaker. As July began, the United States intensified its pressure. New B-29 groups arrived, increasing the number of operational aircraft across the Pacific. Reconnaissance missions mapped out the last remaining industrial targets. Bombing crews practiced new formations, new approach patterns, and new techniques for evading defenses. Though by this point, Japanese defenses were so reduced that many raids saw little resistance at all. Pilots reported seeing fewer and fewer enemy aircraft. Anti-aircraft guns fired half-heartedly, often inaccurate due to lack of ammunition, training, or radar support. Many B-29s returned without a single scratch. The skies that had once been contested were now dominated entirely by the Superfortress. Japan could do nothing but watch as the bombers roared overhead, dropping fire, smoke, and destruction on the homeland. Then, on August 6th, 1945, the world changed forever. The B-29 sees Enola Gay, under the command of Colonel Paul Tibbets, took off carrying the first atomic bomb ever used in warfare. Its target was Hiroshima. The mission proceeded with calm precision. Japanese radar operators detected the lone bomber but assumed it was part of a reconnaissance flight. No alarms were raised. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb was released. Moments later, Hiroshima was engulfed in a blinding flash, followed by a towering mushroom cloud that climbed miles into the sky. The city was virtually erased in an instant. 3 days later, another B-29, Bockscar, delivered the second atomic bomb to Nagasaki. Again, the destruction was immediate and overwhelming. 2 cities had been wiped out with the power of a single bomb each. Something no commander, no strategist, and no civilian had ever imagined possible. But even as the atomic bombing shocked the world, they did not erase the impact of the thousands of B-29 raids that came before. For months, the Japanese people had endured relentless bombardment. Their cities were already in ruins. Their military infrastructure was broken. Their supply lines were destroyed. Japan was already standing at the edge of collapse when the atomic bombs pushed them over. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender. For the first time in Japanese history, the emperor addressed the nation by radio. Speaking in a calm yet somber tone, he explained that the war could no longer continue. He referenced a new and most cruel bomb. But the devastation caused by the months-long B-29 campaign was equally present in the minds of his listeners. Japan had fought as long as it could, but the overwhelming industrial power of the United States, symbolized most clearly by the Superfortress, had made further resistance impossible. With Japan's surrender, the war in the Pacific finally came to an end. The B-29 crews who had flown countless missions returned home. Some were celebrated as heroes, while others carried the psychological scars of the destruction they had delivered. For many, the memories of burning cities, turbulent skies, and lost comrades would stay with them for the rest of their lives. After the war, the B-29 remained a symbol of both American innovation and the destructive potential of modern warfare. It continued to serve in the early years of the Cold War, even participating in the Korean War. But its greatest impact came during World War II, when it performed missions once considered impossible. It crossed oceans, defied enemy defenses, and delivered firepower on a scale unmatched by any aircraft of its time. Even decades later, historians would reflect on how the B-29 fundamentally changed the nature of warfare. Its long range, high altitude, massive payload, and advanced technology paved the way for modern strategic bombers. More importantly, it forced nations around the world to confront a new reality. Wars would no longer be confined to battlefields, entire cities could become targets, and industrial capacity could determine the outcome of conflicts long before armies met face to face. For the people of Japan, the memory of the B-29 remains tied to a period of unimaginable destruction. Survivors recall the distant roar of engines, the glow of burning neighborhoods, and the fear that accompanied every air raid siren. For Americans, the B-29 is remembered as the aircraft that helped bring the war to a close and saved countless lives that would have been lost in a ground invasion of Japan. In the end, the story of the B-29 Superfortress is a story of extremes. Extraordinary innovation, unprecedented destruction, and a relentless drive to end a global war. It dominated Japan's skies with thousand-plane raids, reshaped the course of history, and delivered the final blows that ended World War II. Its legacy lives on, not only in museums and textbooks, but in the very structure of modern warfare. And long after the smoke cleared and the ruins of Japan began to rebuild, the echo of those bombers, the deep, rolling thunder of 1,000 superfortresses, remained etched in the memory of a generation that witnessed the power of the skies unleashed on a scale the world had never seen before.